All right, let's dive into one of the most fascinating corners of criminal law. You've got one crime, but a whole crew of suspects. So how on earth does the legal system figure out who's really to blame? Let's get into it.
I mean, it's a classic scenario, right? You see it in movies all the time. One person does the deed, pulls the trigger, but two other people were there, helping out. So does the law see them all as murderers? That's the big question we're going to unpack today.
To really wrap our heads around this, let's imagine a little scenario. We've got a crew of 3. You've got the driver, we'll call them A. You've got the lookout, that's B. And you have the shooter, C. Just keep those 3 roles in your head as we move forward.
Okay, so before we can decide who's guilty of what, we kind of need to understand the basic anatomy of any crime. Turns out, whether it's stealing a candy bar or robbing a bank, pretty much every crime follows the same 4 basic steps.
So first, it all kicks off with just an idea in someone's head. That's stage 1, contemplation. Then comes preparation, getting the tools for the job. Stage 3 is the attempt, which is when they actually try to do it. And finally, if they succeed, you have accomplishment. Keep that 4-stage process in mind, because it's the foundation for everything else.
Now, let's take that blueprint and see what happens when you have a group of people. This is where we run into our first huge legal concept, something called common intention.
Let's go back to our crew. So A, B, and C get together and they hatch a plan. The goal is super clear, it's shared, and everybody is on board. They're going to murder their target, D. So they all have their specific jobs, right? The driver just sits in the car. The lookout keeps an eye out, and the shooter is the one who actually goes inside. Now here's where it gets really interesting in the eyes of the law. This brings us right to the core of what common intention really is. And the key phrase here, the one you really need to remember, is meeting of minds. It just means that they all agreed on the plan. It doesn't matter if they planned it for weeks or just decided on it 5 seconds before. What matters is that their minds met.
And here is the huge consequence of that. Even though only C pulled the trigger, the law says A and B are just as guilty of murder. That meeting of minds basically links them all together, making them equally responsible.
So let's just nail this down. With common intention, the key thing is that meeting of minds. It's all built on a shared plan, and the result is simple: equal blame for everybody. Got it? Okay, hold that thought as we look at something a little different.
So that whole shared plan thing is clearly a huge deal. But what if people have the same goal, but there's no shared plan? Well, that brings us to a different but really important legal idea: similar intention.
Let's picture a totally different situation. Forget our heist crew for a minute. Imagine one street, but it's controlled by 3 rival gangs. These guys are not friends. They do not work together. They're enemies.
Okay, so one day a member from a 4th gang, let's call him Z, shows up on their turf. And seeing this new threat, all 3 gangs, at the exact same moment, decide to attack Z. Each one is acting on their own to protect their territory.
So you have to ask yourself, did they have a meeting of minds? No way. They all wanted the same result: Z gone. So they had a similar goal. But there was no plan, no phone call, no coordination. They acted alone, together.
And that, right there, is the heart of similar intention. Everyone wants the same thing, but they got to that idea all by themselves. In this case, the law says each person is only responsible for what they actually did.
Okay, so seeing them side by side like this makes it crystal clear. Common intention is all about that meeting of minds and a shared plan. Similar intention, it's just the same individual goal with no shared plan at all. And this leads to a massive difference in the result: individual liability. One guy might be guilty of murder, another just assault, depending entirely on what their personal actions led to.
But wait, just when you think you've got it, there's a twist. What happens when a shared plan goes off the rails? This brings us to a final, really important rule that builds on that first idea of common intention.
All right, let's go back to our original guys: the driver, the lookout, and the shooter. And remember what their common intention was? To murder D. Simple as that.
But things get messy. They get to the location and, there's a security guard they didn't plan for. So the lookout, B, makes a split-second decision and shoots the guard to clear a path for the shooter.
Now obviously, killing the guard was not part of that original meeting of minds. So who's responsible for this second death? Is it just the lookout who pulled the trigger, or is everyone suddenly in a whole lot more trouble?
This is where the law has this powerful little clause called the in furtherance of rule. And what it means basically is that if an unplanned crime happens, but it was done to help achieve the main shared goal, then everyone who was in on that original plan is now liable for the new crime too.
So, what's the verdict for our crew? Well, because killing that guard happened in furtherance of their original plan, the law holds the driver, the lookout, and the shooter all equally guilty of murdering the guard. Yep, all three of them. So, why does all this matter so much? Well, as we've seen, intent isn't just some private thought you have. In the eyes of the law, that shared intent is like the glue that holds a criminal conspiracy together, making everyone responsible, even for things they didn't physically do themselves.
And that leaves us with one last big thing to think about. When a group decides to commit a crime, is that shared agreement, that meeting of minds, just as dangerous as the final act itself? The law seems to think so. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.